The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as a young intern named Charlie sorted through old boxes in the back storage room of Suncrest Studios, a forgotten gem tucked behind the Memphis skyline. It was July of 1976, the air sticky with heat, and the studio was being cleared out for renovation. Most of the boxes were filled with old cables, broken mic stands, and yellowed contracts that hadn't been touched in over a decade. But then, tucked behind a rusted file cabinet and half covered in insulation dust, Charlie spotted a worn cardboard box sealed with cracking tape. He opened it absent-mindedly, expecting more junk, but inside, resting like treasure buried in time, was a single reel-to-reel tape. No label, no date, just a handwritten scrawl in faint pencil. Elvis/LMJ Studio B. Curious. Charlie wiped the dust from the spool and stared at it, heart suddenly pounding. Everyone at Suncrest knew the legends about tapes that had gone missing in the 60s, songs recorded and shelved, collaborations whispered about but never confirmed. Could this be one of them? He brought the reel to the control room and gently threaded it through an old machine that hadn't been used in years. The equipment groaned to life, and after a few tense seconds of static, the sound of a guitar hummed through the speakers, raw, warm, unmistakably vintage. Then came a voice. Not Elvis, not yet, but someone else. A woman. Her voice was smoky, aching, beautiful. Charlie leaned in, and then just as he was trying to place the melody, came a second voice, low, haunting, familiar. Elvis Presley. The recording crackled and skipped, but the harmony was clear. It was a duet, and it was unlike anything Charlie had ever heard from the king. As the tape played on, Charlie sat frozen, goosebumps rising on his arms. This wasn't just a lost recording. This was something sacred, something no one alive had heard in over a decade. He didn't know who LMJ was or why the world had never heard this, but he knew one thing: Elvis needed to hear it again. It was a quiet night in late October 1962, and the rain outside Suncrest Studio B tapped gently against the windows like a metronome. Inside, a young singer named Lily Mee Jordan sat nervously at the edge of a wooden stool, clutching a worn lyric sheet in her hand. She was just 24, barely known outside of gospel circles, but she had a voice that could wrap itself around your bones, a deep, soulful timbre that carried the ache of every hymn she'd ever sung in her small Alabama church. That night, she wasn't supposed to be there. The studio time had been booked by someone else, someone far more famous. Elvis Presley walked in wearing a simple navy shirt and slacks, hair slicked back, smile tired but kind. He'd heard Lily Mee sing once at a charity event in Nashville, and something in her voice had stayed with him. He asked his producer to invite her for a low-key session. No press, no suits, just soul, he'd said. And now the two of them were standing in the same room, a grand piano between them and silence waiting to be broken. They rehearsed softly at first. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she found her harmony. But then something clicked, the melody took shape, and their voices wove together like threads of the same story. Elvis, the king of rock and roll, softened his tone to match hers, letting Lily Mee's emotion lead the way. The song was raw, stripped of theatrics, just pain, hope, and two voices searching for truth. But as powerful as the moment was, it never made it beyond the studio walls. The label executives would later say it was off-brand, too intimate, too unlike the polished sound they wanted for Elvis at the time. And Lily Mee, she was quietly thanked and sent home with a small check and no promise of release. No photos, no liner notes, just a memory and a voice that echoed in one man's heart until it was sealed in a dusty box, waiting decades for someone to press play. 2 weeks after the tape was found, Charlie stood nervously outside a private residence in Graceland, clutching a small package. Inside was the reel, now carefully restored and digitized, along with a letter explaining what he had discovered. He'd tried going through studio executives, but no one wanted to bother Elvis with old junk. So he'd taken a chance, mailing it directly to the king's home, not really expecting anything to come of it. 3 days later, Charlie got a call from a man with a deep southern drawl who simply said, "Mr. Presley would like to see you. Can you come tomorrow?" Graceland was quiet when he arrived. Elvis wasn't wearing rhinestones or surrounded by a crowd. He sat alone in a den, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the carpet. He looked tired, older than his 41 years, but his eyes still held that spark, curious, kind, intense. Charlie handed him the tape. "It's from 1962, he said. "Studio B, well, I think you should just hear it." The room was silent except for the soft whir of the reel. And then the music began, Lily Mee's voice, mournful and rich, blooming from the speakers like it had been waiting all this time. Elvis didn't say a word. His expression didn't change at first. He just stared straight ahead, his fingers pressed against his lips. Then came his own voice, woven gently into the harmony. And that's when it happened, the smallest shake of his shoulders, a breath caught in his throat. Tears welled in his eyes and slowly rolled down his cheeks. "She was special," he whispered almost to himself. "That night, I never forgot it." Charlie didn't know what to say. He had expected interest, maybe even a warm laugh of recognition. But this was grief. This was memory hitting like thunder after silence. Elvis wiped his face, then turned to Charlie. "The world never got to hear her, not the way they should have, but maybe it's not too late." He didn't ask who had found the tape or how it had survived. What mattered to him now was one thing: Lily Mee Jordan's voice had returned, and he wasn't going to let it disappear again. Later that night, Elvis sat alone at his piano, the lights dimmed low. The house was quiet, save for the soft sound of the keys under his fingers. He wasn't playing for anyone, not the fans, not the label, not even the press. He was playing for Lily Mee, for the memory of that rainy night in '62 when two voices had merged into something bigger than fame or fortune, something sacred. He made the decision before sunrise. By morning, Elvis had contacted his team, not his publicist or promoter, but the engineers and sound technicians he trusted most. He wanted the tape cleaned, the vocals remastered but not altered. "Don't polish it," he told them. "Don't make it shiny. Let it breathe. Let people hear it like we sang it, honest." The label was hesitant. This wasn't a new hit. It wasn't marketable. There were no photos, no contracts, and no name recognition for Lily Mee Jordan, but Elvis didn't care. He offered to fund the entire release himself and refused to attach his name as the lead artist. "This isn't about me," he said firmly. "Put her name first. She earned it." His staff searched for Lily Mee's family and eventually found her younger brother living just outside Montgomery. When told of the tape, he broke down crying. "She talked about that night until the day she died," he said. "She said it was the most real she ever felt, like she'd been seen." Elvis sent him a personal letter and a check to set up a small music foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting overlooked gospel and soul singers. But he also made another promise: the world was going to hear Lily Mee sing. As the release date approached, Elvis declined interviews. "Let the music talk," he insisted. For him, this wasn't about press or attention. It was a debt, a silent one, long unpaid. A promise made to a friend whose voice had once stopped him in his tracks and made him believe in music again. Behind the scenes, he worked tirelessly. When his doctors told him to rest, he nodded, and then stayed up another 3 hours finalizing notes with the mastering team. He knew his own time was running short, but he also knew that sometimes legacy wasn't about what you left behind for yourself. It was what you made sure others didn't lose. It began quietly. No fanfare. No press junkets, just a midnight slot on a small Nashville radio station known more for old blues than Billboard charts. The DJ, a middle-aged man named Frankie Ray, had received the record anonymously with a handwritten note that read, "Give her voice a chance. Signed, E." He almost tossed it aside, but something about the raw look of the vinyl, the simple label, Lily Mee Jordan and Elvis Presley, "Where no one looks," held his attention. Frankie dropped the needle and the static gave way to that aching, soul-rich harmony. He leaned back in his chair, the smoke from his cigarette curling into the air, and for 3 minutes and 20 seconds he didn't move. When the song ended, he picked up the mic and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know where that came from or why it never made it out before tonight, but I think we all just heard a voice that should never have been forgotten." That single play turned into 2, then 4, then a dozen. Listeners called in asking who Lily Mee Jordan was. One woman wept on the line. A trucker pulled over on the interstate just to call and say the duet reminded him of his late wife. By the end of the week, the station had received more letters about that one song than any other in a decade. Word spread, other DJs picked it up. Music magazines started running short blurbs, Elvis's lost duet. Soon national outlets were paying attention. But no one could ignore the heart of it, Lily Mee's voice. Not polished, not packaged, but real. Her story, once buried beneath industry red tape and forgotten reels, came alive in listeners' imaginations. People wanted to know who she was, why they'd never heard of her, and how a voice like that had nearly been lost to time. Fan clubs dedicated pages to her. College radio stations did retrospectives on hidden voices of soul. And through it all, Elvis stayed silent. He didn't need to say anything. The music and the way people were responding to it spoke louder than any statement could. It was no longer about nostalgia, it was about revelation. What began as a quiet tribute soon grew into a movement. Music executives who once dismissed the recording as unfit for commercial play now scrambled to find similar forgotten gems buried in their archives. Critics praised the duet not just for its historical value, but for the emotional purity that radiated from every note. It was unlike anything on the radio. But the most important shift didn't happen in boardrooms. It happened in how the industry began to view overlooked artists. Lily Me's name, once scribbled in pencil on a box no one was meant to open, now graced stages and tributes across the country. Music historians dug into old gospel records and live church recordings, uncovering more of her work. And suddenly the world realized, Lily Me hadn't been a one-hit wonder. She'd been a hidden voice in a world too noisy to listen. 1 month after the song's re-release, Elvis issued a single public statement, published in Rolling Stone. Lily Me sang like truth was leaking from her soul. The fact that the world didn't hear her back then, well, that's not something I can undo. But I can help now. And sometimes that's all you can do, help now. The statement struck a chord, not just with fans, but with younger artists. Independent singers began citing Lily Me as an influence. A tribute album was produced with modern soul and country musicians covering her unreleased songs. Even Beyoncé reportedly called her voice haunting and holy. The impact was undeniable, but what moved Elvis most wasn't the accolades or recognition. It was the letter he received, handwritten and folded neatly in an envelope with no return address. Inside it read, "My sister always believed the world would hear her someday. Thank you for making that true. She's singing with the angels now, but this brought her back." Elvis kept that letter in the top drawer of his writing desk, along with a copy of the original tape. He never sought credit for any of it. He didn't need to. What mattered was that Lily Me's voice, once silenced by the system, was now part of the world's songbook. And in doing so, Elvis reminded everyone, especially the music industry, that sometimes the most important role of a star isn't to shine. It's to help others be seen. The final time Elvis listened to the song was just a few months before his passing. It was a quiet evening at Graceland. The house was still, save for the ticking of a wall clock and the soft sound of rain against the window panes. In the corner of his private music room, he sat alone, wrapped in a blanket, the old reel now digitized playing softly from a sleek player. Lily Me's voice floated through the room, wrapping around him like a memory. And when his own harmony joined hers, something in his eyes shifted, not sadness, not regret, but peace. In the years between that first studio session in 1962 and this final moment, Elvis had stood on stages before millions, broken records, and lived the kind of life few could dream of. But here, in this quiet moment with a forgotten duet playing in the background, he found something far greater, a sense of purpose fulfilled. He had righted a wrong. He had used his fame not to spotlight himself, but to give light to someone else. And in doing so, he had reminded the world of something it often forgets, that greatness isn't always in who takes the stage, but who holds the curtain open for others. Later, after his death, that song became part of his legacy. Not because it was a hit or because it broke sales records, but because it revealed a side of Elvis few had seen. The man who believed in second chances, in hidden voices, and in the power of doing what's right, quietly, humbly, completely. To this day, that duet continues to play across radio stations, streaming platforms, and late-night retrospectives. Not as an artifact, but as a living message. A reminder that no voice is too small to matter, and no moment too late to make it heard. If this story moved you, take a moment, right now, to think about someone in your life whose voice has gone unheard. Someone whose talent, kindness, or quiet courage has been overlooked. Share this video with them, tag their name, tell them, "I see you." Because that's what Elvis did. He saw Lily Me when no one else did. And through one lost recording, he showed us that lifting others up isn't just a noble act, it's a legacy. So if this story stirred something in your soul, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that their voice matters. And in the comments below, tell us, who's the Lily Me in your life? We'd love to know. The music may fade, but the message lives on. Let's keep it playing.